Positive reinforcement produces virtuous cycles. By doing the right action, it increases in how enjoyable it is. You get greater mastery in it, and it becomes more meaningful. Well, that's exactly what Alfie Kohn wants. Are those things to increase? Positive reinforcement itself is what explains intrinsic motivation.
Before we get started, if you enjoy these episodes, you might want to check out more at OptimalWork.com. Our website offers unique content, tools, and exercises to help you thrive at work and beyond. We have an in-depth masterclass covering our entire theory of growth, daily recommendations for personalized advice, and a platform to help groups and organizations learn and practice optimal work together. You can get a free trial at OptimalWork.com. Now let's start the episode. Hey, this is Sharif, back with Dr. Kevin Majors. Kevin, good to be back here with you.
Hey, Sharif, thanks for having me back.
Yeah, of course. Well, Kevin, last week we had this great discussion about Alfie Kohn's book, Punished by Rewards, and the impact it's had on me personally, obviously. And
yes.
A week later, I have to say that it's still on my mind. And we were pretty positive about it last week, I think. And I think we still, at least I'll speak for myself, I still see a lot of good in it. And every time I read something of his or hear him talk, it's great. And I like a lot of the things. But then there are just some things that have been not settling well. So I thought maybe we could use that as an intro to discuss his work again.
Sounds great. I know that you were, before the show, you were telling me some of your concerns about him being somehow inherently contradicting himself.
Right. Yeah. Okay. That's one point. So he says that this thing of praising people or giving rewards is controlling them because you're wanting them to behave a certain way. And so you reward them when they behave in that way. So it's adults manipulating children. And he says that if we want kids to turn out ethical, curious, creative, happy, then we shouldn't praise them. But that just seems to be, he has an idea of how kids should turn out, and he's behaving towards them in such a way that they're more likely to turn out that way. So he seems to be doing exactly the thing he critiques, which is judging them according to a model and wanting them to be a certain way and then behaving towards them, treating them in a way that produces that. So I don't know. Is he contradicting himself?
It seems it's necessary, isn't it, that we have some idea of what the good is?
Yeah.
And that if we want others to attain the good, we're going to do what we can to help them attain the good.
Yeah.
So he has all his readers that he thinks need to attain this good, and he is trying to get us to do that. And he does it actually by rewarding and punishing. So that if you agree with him, you're rewarded as being somehow authentic and sincere and helpful. And if not, then you're destructive, manipulative, seductive, destroying. So in fact, there's a lot of reward and punishment built into the very nature of punished by rewards.
Interesting.
And that's why it actually strikes a chord, I think, in so many people that on the one hand, if you agree with him on some basics, it's highly rewarding. But if you've ever been a person who has ever rewarded or punished another human being, you're instantly shamed by it, and you find it very punishing. So he tends to bring out then these different reactions in people based on essentially how much of a role do you play in the development of others. Because if you're like doing anything in helping others to develop, there's some kind of reward, or maybe not punishment so much, but there's always some kind of reward going on.
On the other hand, then the more I listen, it is kind of rewarding. I mean, he has a nice, elegant theory that I think fits with a lot of the things that we observe, and fits with elements of our approach too. So, I mean, one thing maybe to start with is this idea of not being judgmental. That I think when you're working with young people, they don't want to have the sense that you're constantly judging them and evaluating them, but they're just growing and learning. And so, but that doesn't mean that you set the judgmental, set it to zero, that you never, so he seems to take it to this kind of radical conclusion. Is there a basis for that, or is that a problem in his reasoning?
So I think that when it comes to my experience of helping others, is just take the domain of therapy. I do think that it would be strange for me to constantly be passing judgment on people. You know, but if a patient of mine has been afraid of, say, public speaking for years, and we've been working on this big talk he's about to give, and then he comes back and says, yes, I did it, and I actually loved it. The adrenaline was so thrilling. And instead of, I tried to go with it, and and so he felt like he hit a home run there. I'm not gonna. Alfie Kohn says that the two things you can say are, one is just look at them. So, and then the other is you can say you did it, to acknowledge what they did. So, and then he also says that you can ask questions, and say like, oh, wait, great. How did you do that? Tell me more about that. Now, that third one is excellent. But the first two, if you responded just by looking at the person and like blinking a few times, I mean, that would be a downer. So you do need to celebrate and acknowledge real progress that people make. And that's what always, when I'm reading him and listening to his interviews and things, he has a cogent critique against rewards and punishments being overused. It's less cogent when he's saying that they can never be used. So, and I do think you don't want people getting addicted to praise, because that is going to set them up for being afraid of failing, because they're going to feel like, ooh, then the praise is all going to dry up. But I think also you do want to be generous in acknowledging progress that people make. You don't want to be as if you're so hard to please or hard to delight that they'll never be good enough. I don't think that would be helpful for anyone.
Yeah, and there's a thing of making it pleasant for people, that as you're working through challenges together, you're encouraging one another and kind of uplifting.
Yeah.
So it's not just this kind of dry thing. Well, I guess the flip side of this too is that he says reward and punishment are kind of two sides of the same coin, and so obviously we've talked a lot about how he opposes rewards. And I suppose he's kind of against discipline as well, although the book isn't as focused on that. But maybe it would be helpful to cover this a little bit of his approach to discipline and whether there are issues with that.
Yeah, so he has one of his most famous lines is that the problem with a good judgment isn't that it's good, it's that it's a judgment. So there seems to be a sense that any kind of judging of others is going to damage their self-esteem in the end. And that means then that any standard you would have for discipline would be potentially destructive, of people's self-esteem. Which would make you wonder then, what's the relationship between self-esteem and discipline? So what is discipline? So I think that one of the functions of adults is to provide the guidelines for self-mastery that children are not yet fully capable of attaining, but they are capable of incrementally approaching. That we're not born with our prefrontal cortexes fully online and capable of mature adult decisions. Because of that, we rely on others who have a fully developed capacity to master themselves, at least basic enough, that they can then help us in our behavioral choices. So giving a child everything that child wants could not be a formula for success. Like, how would you teach a child self-mastery without some system of showing it rewards and punishments, showing it some sense of discipline, right? So at least that you're pleased that they're acting so well, or you're displeased, at how they're behaving, and that they're capable of more. So I think when you talk about like being punishing, well, that can sound like it's always something very negative, but it could also be a sense that if a child doesn't, like if they are, say, striking one of their siblings, Well, you wouldn't want to like be condoning that. You'd want to be intervening. You'd want them to know that you don't think they're inherently bad, but also that they were facing a challenge and this was some way that they were trying to respond. It's understandable, but also they have to realize that they were hurting another person. Well, that whole interaction, even if it's very positive, is still kind of punishing. And I don't think that's an inherently bad thing.
Mm-hmm. And it's all judgmental.
And it's all judgmental.
In the sense that you're judging the action as bad.
Yeah. Yeah, it's that, but children need the help if they're going to develop the capacity to do it on their own. So it's actually an example that I'll try to be gentle, but the example of toilet training. So there is a judgment that all parents have that it's bad to wear diapers for your whole life, right? And yet, if you don't teach children by a certain age to control their bladder, they may never develop the ability. There are cases where the sphincter never develops because it was never exercised because the parents had this idea that the children would learn on their own eventually. But okay, now that's not to go too far down that line, but just to say that parents set limits to their children's behavior in a way that's for their children's good. And that's the appropriate way of being loving. So being loving means helping people attain the good they're capable of attaining. So you believe they're capable of it, and then you help them to set by setting stretch goals, just outside the difficulty level, what they can do easily, so that they learn how to grow. And the remarkable thing about all children is they love challenges. They love growth. The parent's role is to be then guiding that growth. And so it begins with simple things of self-control, like controlling their body and its functions, and then controlling how they are towards other people, and gradually the children are learning a healthy kind of mastery, of themselves, of their own behavior, so that they learn how to wait, they learn how to be polite and generous and kind. The idea is that the parents provide a guidance, and this is true not just of parents, but of all teachers. Any teaching means you're providing this kind of guidance to help people set challenges for themselves that are attainable. So it could be done in a controlling way where you're doing it for your own good. I think that it would be genuinely bad. Like everything is just about parental convenience. Well, if the children get that sense, then it's like might makes right. So that's you're just doing this because of a power differential. But if it's genuinely for their own good, that they are capable of this, and you're confident that this will get easier with practice. So this gets into like what it means, I think, to genuinely be encouraging. The encouragement requires some kind of standards, but they're standards that are ultimately inspiring.
Before we continue, a brief message. If you're benefiting from these discussions, please take a moment to hit like and subscribe. Doing so helps us to reach more people. So you're not just learning, you're also helping others to discover a path of growth and flourishing. Thanks for your support. Yeah, so with this thing of being judgmental, I mean, I if I'm, in a work situation, or if I want to get better at anything, which I suppose is ultimately why people go to you and see for therapy, is because they want to improve in their approach to challenge or in different areas of their life. They're going to want another person's counsel or judgment of how can I do, where can I improve? How can I do better? So it seems like a mature person who wants to grow is going to actually seek out the judgment of other people. But there's a difference there's two ways, I suppose, of judging someone. One is to look at their actions and judge, okay, what was bad and how can you improve, or, what was good. But then the second is like judging the person as you are bad, so it seems like these two things are being conflated when you're saying, you're being judgmental, that there really is a way to judge person's actions. Maybe we would say their strategies and help them see, okay, this strategy isn't working. Let's develop a new strategy. And that's like a more uplifting form of being judgmental. But it seems like Alfie Kohn is not really aware of that form, or he doesn't really address, or he conflates it with the other way of being judgmental.
Yeah, and there's a lot of research on praise. And there is a consistent pattern in the research that praising process is better than praising outcomes. So if you praise outcomes, like, um, even that, like that was like you're so smart for getting an A on that test or something like that. That's very different than praising the kind of strategy that they used to do that, or praising the effort they put into it, or the creativity they showed in figuring out how to do that. So also there's a difference. So there's kind of another way of viewing that is praising the some permanent quality in the person, which is a lot like an outcome, like you're so smart, versus a process, which is how you engage the challenge, well, how you really engage that challenge well. And I'm so proud to see how you did that. Okay, so we know that praising the person, people do that when they're afraid that the person has low self-esteem. And like, see, you're so smart, or you're so, coordinated, or you're so, well, praising the person and personal qualities does tend to be part of like this fostering a sense of a fixed mindset about qualities. And it can easily sound extravagant. And another thing we know for sure from the research is that extravagant praise is undermining. So Brummelman is the researcher at Stanford who has done, I think, the best studies on how parents praise children and what happens, as a result of that. So his studies show that if you look at the effect on narcissism, as measured in 7 to 11-year-olds, which is when it starts to show up, and self-esteem levels, what you find is that parents who overpraise, who use some kind of extravagant praise that they exaggerate, that is correlated with low self-esteem in the children. And one of the reasons why that's speculated is children hear this praise, but it doesn't fit their experience. It's like, the mom is always saying, this is a quote from one of the studies, my mom always said, I'm such an amazing drawer, but the other kids all draw better than me. So if because of the overpraise and the drawing skills, it just didn't ring true anymore, and it ends up undercutting self-esteem. But interesting that non-extravagant praise, so moderate praise, had no effect one way or another on self-esteem. So one, it doesn't seem like it's damaging, because what Alfie Kohn is ultimately interested in is actually self-esteem. That's like a major thing for him. So we have good studies that, in fact, praise, if it's moderate, doesn't undermine it. But also that they did find in this study that extravagant praise for kids who have high self-esteem does lead to narcissistic traits. So if you have a kid who already has no doubts about his self-worth, and you make these things about how incredible or exceptional his or her abilities are, then in fact that does tend to lead to narcissism, that's another very interesting finding. That it's always been suspected that if parents overpraise children, that is at risk for narcissism. But there's actually now research findings showing that, and from very high quality research at Stanford.
So, okay, I guess zooming out a little bit, how do you judge Alfie Kohn's theory? No, how do you evaluate it overall? Because it seems like he has this great insight but then he's kind of absolutized it. So,
yeah,
what's your overall kind of evaluation here?
So overall, I think that there is so much truth in what he's saying about the importance of intrinsic motivation and how we do not want to undermine intrinsic motivation. So providing extravagant or unnecessary extrinsic motivators, whether it's money incentives or praise, or that can be undercutting. I think that critique is a very solid critique. But I would think that there are a few areas where he goes too far in making claims. And one is that how against Skinner he is. So let me defend Skinner briefly.
Well, sorry, Kevin. Skinner is the guy who did all of his experiments on rodents and wrote all of his books about people. Is that right?
Exactly.
Okay, just to get that.
That's right. So, but like, what has behavioral therapy made of Skinner? I think Alfie Kohn would actually like it. So you take the idea of positive reinforcement, which is that people get some reward from doing the right behavior. But that is ultimately Alfie Kohn's claim, that doing these things authentically for them, like freely, will develop in the children a taste for doing it, that they will like to do it more and more. So if children can come to love being generous and practice generosity, they can kind of get the taste of that, and they're like, oh, I actually like doing this. Or I like being caring. I like being encouraging to my friends and fair and all these. Well, in fact, that's the sense then that virtue is its own reward is the highest point of positive reinforcement theory. So positive reinforcement produces virtuous cycles. By doing the right action, it increases in how enjoyable it is. You get greater mastery in it and it becomes more meaningful. Well, that's exactly what Alfie Kohn wants. Are those things to increase? So positive reinforcement itself is what explains intrinsic motivation. Right? So I think he kind of is being too harsh on Skinner and Skinnerianism, when, yes, I think Skinner was a reductionist, and I don't think he understood I don't think he understood human nature well at all. But this kind of feedback is actually the heart of what understanding modern behavioral therapy is understanding of virtue theory. The second thing that is extremely important is what is negative reinforcement? So it's how rewarding it is when you stop something that is obnoxious or noxious. So the beeping in the car until you put on the seatbelt, or let's say you ignore someone until they do what you like and then you pay attention to them. Well, that could be done very manipulatively. And so, yes, and I think that Alfie Kohn's critique of being manipulative is excellent. But you can take it too far. Because when you think about it, the ultimate negative reinforcer is negative emotion itself. So people feel anxious, and then if they give in to their anxiety and avoid the challenge, they suddenly feel relief. Well, that's the reinforcing power of relief. That's negative reinforcement. So that you understand that negative emotions, are the ultimate negative reinforcer, and therefore they're what drive every vicious cycle. Well, that's an incredibly important thing. So when you're helping someone and you want them to overcome, say, some bad habit that they've formed, you're going to have to help that person to see that, okay, you might feel like hitting your sister, but that anger is something that you can learn to work with. We can put the anger into words and talk about it. I can help you to process it. And if you work with children on that, processing the negative emotion, you're showing them what can get easier and easier with practice. I know it's hard right now, but I'm confident you can do it. Well, that's another essential part of being encouraging, that you're helping them to see that, okay, there's a difficulty here that will get easier and easier if I keep engaging this challenge. So that's extremely encouraging. That's what I call being uplifting. You show how it's going to get, the burden will get lighter and lighter with practice. So Skinner actually helps us to see what is the essence of being uplifting with someone, to show what gets easier, and also to be inspiring with someone, to show the kind of qualities that get more and more rewarding as you do them. So I hope that's not too long-winded, but I think that Skinner, in fact, those principles are still very powerful, and that Alfie Kohn, if he understood them in their more modern form, would actually have no problem with them.
So it's very interesting to see Skinner's view of progress and virtuous cycles, and also the way that his view has been developed in now into modern behavioral therapy. I guess the next question I have is Kohn's view. How do you see Kohn's view of the development of the person? Because to me, it seems like what he's describing is that kids are they start out always just perfect. And then there's this process of, continued perfection. I mean, obviously they grow in terms of their skills and abilities, or they grow into, he calls it, curious and ethical people. But that the only thing that parents do potentially is ruin that process through praise or something. So how does Kohn, see this development, and then, why even have parents at all if kids are just start out perfect and they're just going to grow and become more perfect?
Yeah, no, he does present this idea that it's society and rewards and punishments that ruin kids. Yeah, and that they do seem like it's a very Rousseauian idea that they start off perfect and then we just damage them. They're perfect, yet somehow they're incredibly fragile.
Yeah.
Because they can be destroyed by the smallest amount of praise.
Yeah.
So like if you praise any child, that child will get addicted to the praise. And now you're going to have to always praise. And if you reward them in any way for being good, then they will never be good because they will only do things for the sake of the reward. And he's really stark on that. And what I think behaviorism has, on the contrary, is a much more incremental view of how the higher ideals that you aim for, well, one, you start off smaller. Like, I don't think that kids are going to be capable immediately of the most self-sacrificing, generous love, because that really requires a prefrontal cortex and the capacity for deeper bonds. They just don't, they're on their way there, but they're not there yet. So there's a sense of incrementalism that you meet people where they're at, and then it's always about helping them to stretch one bit better. So then you help them to be more, let's say, I think what's more important for children early on is learning how to work. Learning how to do good work, how to put in effort and see where that, what that can build. So there's these like milestones in how children develop. My point here is just that they're all incremental, and you're helping the kid to get a taste for some kind of excellence. So it could be the ability to read, the ability to write, or some sport or music ability, but you're helping them to get a taste for practice paying off. And practice paying off means that the difficulty gets less and less and less, and then the reward gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And that's all intrinsic to the activity. But then there's also higher and higher ways of thriving. So we can't expect people to have the highest possible motive right from the start. That things proceed, Aristotle says, things proceed in nature from the imperfect to the perfect. And the higher the kind of thing you want the person to love, the more spiritual that is, the later it develops. That couldn't be the case if Alfie Kohn was right. That somehow that it's a bait and switch to like first start with more extrinsic things and then work to more intrinsic. But I think that that's just fundamentally wrong. That we do always proceed from imperfect to the more perfect. First you learn to play the piece on the piano bit by bit, and then you put it all together into the expressive, spontaneous song. First, you learn how to meditate bit by bit, and then you learn to contemplate. But there's always these steps, and we proceed from the easier steps to then the more challenging ones.
And we always need other people's help to make that ascent.
Yeah, because they're the ones that show us that, it's possible for us to attain these greater excellences. So they give us this confidence that we just need to find a way of engaging the challenge so that we can start getting traction in it. So I don't think the motive can come from the other person, but ideally we find other people optimistic and uplifting and inspiring for us.
Mm-hmm. Wonderful. Well, I found this conversation optimistic, uplifting, and inspiring. So thanks, Ken.
Great. Then
it worked.
Accomplished, and I appreciate your praise.
Yeah.
Okay.
Great. All right. Well, we'll be back. We'll be back next week.
Thanks, Sharif.
Thanks so much. Thanks for tuning in to today's episode. If you enjoyed our conversation and you're looking for more in-depth guidance, check out OptimalWork.com. our unique platform that delivers content, tools, and exercises to help you thrive at work and beyond.